Patrick, the goal of this video is to walk through my Patrimo. A little bit of context on myself. This is a tool I built for myself to basically track the accounts, investments that I had. I personally had accounts in France, Germany, and Canada, and I was tracking in a spreadsheet, which at one point got very overwhelming, especially tracking FX rates, as well as tax costs and whatnot. So I kind of built myself a tool called my Patrimo to actually have a dashboard to monitor and manage it all. And over time, I've had a few friends ask me for access, so I decided to actually make it an open source tool so that anyone can actually use it. So this is a pretty in-depth video to be able to set up your account. So I'm just going to add sections as well in the video description so you can skip to different sections if you actually want to jump ahead. So firstly, we're going to go through an overview. This is what a finished app looks like. I've created a dummy app from my Gmail account. It's not real data, but the idea is really just to understand what the app looks like when you've actually set up and imported all your investments, stocks, accounts, debts, whatnot. Second of all, we're going to go into importing our data. There's 4 different ways you can import your data into the tool, and we're going to walk through all 4. Third, we're going to talk about exporting our data, CSV and PDF statements. Fourth, we're going to talk about how you can share your dashboards, whether it's with friends and family, or let's say a financial advisor that you want to actually take a look at your portfolio and give advice. Fifth, we're going to briefly skim over other features, depth, fire, ETF compare, and much more. And then sixth, we're going to talk about budgeting, how you can track, adjust, and manage your budget on a month-to-month basis. And last but not least, we're going to talk about investment planning, how you can plan your monthly contributions to dollar cost average and to essentially grow your net worth. Awesome. Awesome. So we're going to get started with a test account that I've already set up here with my personal Gmail account. So the first thing you'll see when you land in my Patrimo is this overview dashboard. Now, the idea here is that it tracks for all the information that you've added in my Patrimo, your net worth, your total assets, and your total debt. You'll notice here you have the ability to track in different currencies, and we'll get into in the settings page how you can add as many currencies as you want to track in your portfolio. So the first thing you'll see here in your overview is kind of a month over month, week over week, over time track of your net worth. How is it growing? How is your assets versus debts growing, and your net worth by asset class? In the drill down section, we'll actually be able to track by different accounts, by institutions, and by different currencies, how your overall portfolio is looking. From a per stock point of view, we're also going to be tracking our dividends. So in the investment sub-tab, you have the ability to add individual stocks that you're actually tracking and tie them back to the accounts. So based on that, we'll look at the dividends that these shares are paying quarterly, monthly, semi-annually, whatnot, and be able to track how much you can expect to receive on a yearly basis in dividends. On that same note, again, based on the stocks that you've inputted into my Patrimo, we'll be able to look at all the earnings that are coming out and essentially whether or not those stocks beat, missed, or hit their expected earning calls. Last but not least, we have an IPO calendar, which is essentially going to show all the upcoming IPOs by stock markets. So essentially you can make decisions on whether or not you want to partake in some upcoming IPOs. And now the idea here is really just to take all the data that you've input into accounts, investments, and debts. And we're going to go into now like a high level overview of what those sub-tabs look like, but we'll drill more into them into different sections of the video. So first and foremost, accounts. The idea is really just all the accounts that you have with different banks, different investments, and you can tie those back either directly to the values of those accounts, or you can tie them back to more specifically the different stocks that those accounts have. So I have an example here of my TFSA with Wealthsimple, which has been auto-tied to the different stocks that I hold there. If I actually click on this, we'll see all the different stocks that I hold here, the live market price, the gains and losses, and essentially be able to filter for that account. If I remove this filter, we'll see all the different stocks that I'm tracking here. And again, all those stocks are tied back to accounts, but you don't necessarily need to tie an account to a stock. Let's say, for example, I have a checking account. That's just checking. It doesn't tie back to any stocks. That can just be an account that you can add with a certain value. And we'll get into later in the video how you can actually add different accounts or different investments, because there's a few different ways depending on your user type and how you actually want to add the data. Now, on that same note on your holdings, we also have a plan sub-tab. The idea here is really just to track on a regular basis how you're actually going to dollar cost average or how you're actually investing your money. So in Canada, for example, we have multiple vehicles of reducing our tax burden, FHSA, RSP, TFSA. So investing in those accounts on a bi-weekly or monthly basis makes sense. And the idea is really to just plan how you're going to bi-weekly invest your money, essentially. Next, we have our debt subtab, fairly straightforward, very similar to the accounts and investments page, a few different ways to add it, but essentially the idea here is to track the different debts that you have, whether it's credit card debt, real estate, a mortgage, and essentially take it into account in your overall kind of portfolio. Next, we have a budgeting subtab. So the idea here is really just to track on a month-to-month basis cash inflows and cash outflows from your account, right? So essentially you can see here, I have my salary that's coming in, my cost of housing, my savings, and essentially on a month-to-month basis, you're actually able to track your savings rate and essentially how your overall, financial health on a monthly basis is looking. In the edit page, you'll see you have the ability to also, define things as reoccurring. For example, things like salary or rent, these things typically don't change. And if you do that, if you label them as reoccurring, they'll automatically get copied over to the next month when you create your budget for that next month. The next subtab here is where we have the fire simulator. What fire essentially is the ability to essentially determine or estimate if you're investing X amount per month and you need X amount or Y amount, to retire on a yearly basis, how long it's going to reach you to actually retire. So it's really just a very simple calculator, but essentially it plays on the current net worth that you've inputted to give you a more kind of realistic view as time goes by and how much time you need to actually retire based on how much money you actually need on a yearly basis. Next, we have the ETF compare subtab. What this really is for is, like, for example, in my portfolio, I have two ETFs that I'm holding, VFV and QQQ. If I want to actually compare these two ETFs, understand which one makes more sense from a cost point of view, from a performance point of view, as well as from a risk one, I can compare it in this subtab to understand which one's the best for my personal investor profile. Last but not least, my favorite, thing here is the AI Insights subtab. So essentially, this is going to take all the data that you have, that you've inputted, and essentially generate kind of an AI report on how to improve it and essentially where your potential risks and pitfalls are. So as an example here, in this example portfolio, I have 50% of my assets in cash. That's very cash heavy for someone my age who shouldn't be that risk adverse. So in this case, we have the ability to essentially set targets. For example, if I want to be a bit more investment heavy and remove so much of my portfolio in cash, I can say these targets and regenerate the AI performance. So they essentially suggest ways to improve my portfolio. On that same note, we have the holdings overlap. So if we analyze here, we'll see that in my portfolio, I have two ETFs, VFV and XEQ2, which are 91% similar. So that means under the scenes, they're actually tracking a lot of the same companies. So buying these two stocks probably doesn't make sense in my investment plan. It's probably something I should reconsider. We also have an diversification sector, which is essentially going to look at the sectors and geographies that we are actually investing in. And essentially, if you are too hedged, for example, in Canada, in one single geography or one single industry, right? And based on all that data, we have an AI analysis, which essentially is going to give suggestions on what you can improve and key actions to consider to improve your overall portfolio. So that's it on a very high level on the different subtabs on an account that's been set up fully and how you can actually use it. And we're now going to dive into each section so that you can actually set up an account so that it looks just like this. So adding your account is really two options. The first option is I just want to add the value of that account. So let's say, for example, that I have a checking account with BMO that has, let's say, $5,000 in it. I can just add that account and that's just going to track $5,000 for that account by value. The second option is to add an account and actually have it tied to underlying stocks. So let's say, for example, I have a trading account that's tied to, let's say, Robinhood. I can actually say these are investments and I want to automatically input the values of that account by tracking those investments. So if I add this account, you'll see initially it has $0. If I then go to my investment sub-tab, I can then say, okay, I want to track VFV. I want to add it to my trading account. Let's say I have 20 shares that I bought for let's say $150 a share. And I can say I automatically want to track the market price of this stock. So you'll see that when you head back to accounts, that in our trading account, we now have $3,000 because it's tracking the underlying stock that's tied to that account. So the next way to import your data is via CSV. You'll notice that in every single subtab, accounts, investments, and debt, there's the ability to import data. Now, in this case, I've already created a non-registered account that I want to tie back to my investments. So if I go to the investment subtab and I'm going to import a dummy CSV, which I've filled in from the template that you can download here, I can import that and it's automatically going to validate that the data is valid, that it matches an account that actually I have in file. And if I click import, automatically it's going to import those stocks and track them to the current prices. I can click the refresh prices if I want to grab the actual live prices. But in a nutshell, if I go back to my accounts, I can now see that that non-registered account has a balance that's actually tied to all the different stocks that I imported. So the next way that I can import data is using the AI import tool. So let's just say, for example, I have this non-registered account. I want to tie it to these individual stocks, but I don't want to import or manually type the price I paid for every single share. What you can do here is in my investments and import, I can copy AI instructions, give any AI the instructions that you want to actually have, as well as an image of the stocks and their current price. The next thing you have to do is actually give it the account that you actually want to tie the investments to. So in this case, I want to tie them back to my non-registered account. It's going to essentially analyze the prompt and generate a CSV. I've already downloaded the CSV in a separate tab, but if you essentially again go into upload the CSV, it'll have the same behavior as manually creating the CSV, but obviously with a lot less work. So the fourth way to actually connect your data to my Patrimo is to actually connect your bank or your trading account, any third-party institution that's supported via Plaid. It's important to note here that this integration is done via Plaid. We don't actually get any bank account credentials. All that my Patrimo receives is just the account and the overall value. So if I actually click on connect a bank, it's going to redirect me to a Plaid pop-up. I've already gone through this flow. So I already have my Bank of Montreal account connected. If I click confirm, it's going to essentially pull all the accounts that I have with BMO and bring them back to my Patrimo. You also have the ability to essentially sync those accounts on a regular basis. My Patrimo won't sync the accounts without your consent. So if the last time I synced these accounts were yesterday, if I press sync now, it's going to pull those accounts again from my personal bank account. And again, when you're actually in the checkout flow, you can choose all the different accounts that you have with the institution that you want to bring to my Patrimo. For example, with BMO, I have a checking account, I have a TFSA, and I have a savings account. I only chose to bring in the checking and savings account, not the TFSA. But essentially that flexibility is all yours. Awesome, so exporting your data is fairly straightforward. The first thing you can do here is hit this export PDF button. This is going to generate a PDF of your comprehensive kind of dashboard, accounts, and investments that you can then share with friends and family as needed. Looks something like this. It's fairly straightforward. It's essentially all the same information that you'll have in your dashboard overview, and that's about it. To export your data as CSV, you'll notice that there's export CSV buttons on every single sub-tab. Another way that you can also do this is in the settings page, you have the ability to export for a single, let's say tab, or you can just hit this export all button. If you hit export all, it's automatically going to export all those data sets at once in one go. So to give someone access to your dashboard, it's fairly straightforward. You just have to head to the settings page, and then in the shared access, I can go ahead and type an email of someone that I actually want to give access to. Let's say I want to give access to this account email of mine, and click invite. That's going to send out an email that looks something like this. Once they accept, you have the ability to choose the permissions of that user. By default, they only have access to view, accounts, investments, and debts, not edit. One thing to know is that the email link expires after 7 days. So if after 7 days the person doesn't join, they will no longer be able to join your account. Even if they click on that invite link, you're going to have to resend a new email link. At any point, you can revoke access to remove access from your shared account. So dEPs here are really straightforward. You have the ability to track, to add your dEPs. In the same ways you can add accounts, you can add them manually or automatically via your bank. It's important to know that you can also actually track your interest rate, which will automatically take into account how the debt needs to increase over time. You also have a payoff estimator that you can use to actually assume how long it's going to take you to actually pay off that debt. One more thing I want to show is how you can actually add a different currency. So I can show here, if I choose, for example, to add GBP, I can add this in my currencies, and in my dashboard, my portfolio can now be shown in British pounds. All right, last but not least, I want to chat through the investment planning section. I feel like this is really helpful for me personally, just to kind of plan how I actually want to allocate the funds. You can see here that you can add different accounts that you've already added in your MyPatrimo accounts. Within that, you can add funds. So for example, my TFSA, I'm contributing in these accounts on a regular basis. You can also set the MER to understand how much fees you're paying in total. And it's going to give you kind of an overview of how you can actually, where your money's going, into what accounts, and also how much it's going to look annually. If you decide to change the contributions to be weekly or monthly based on how you invest, you can do that as well and save the plan, and it'll automatically update the view of the plan. Awesome. So for budgeting, we briefly went over this in the overview video, but I kind of want to highlight how you can actually use it. So if I go ahead and click copy previous month, it's automatically going to repopulate the data for this month, June, based on the data in May. If I go ahead and click edit, I can set, again, data is reoccurring, such as my salary, my rent, transport. These are fixed costs. They occur every month, and it'll automatically get repopulated in the next month when it shows up. I also want to call to the fact that you can use categories to essentially define areas. So let's say, for example, in housing, you can see here in housing, I define my rent as well as my electricity. If, let's say, I added another row and let's say I called Wi-Fi, I also added in the housing subsection. Let's say I paid a crazy Wi-Fi of $600. You can see here it automatically gets added into this housing section, which personally makes it easier, at least for me, to see how much percent is going into each category. All right, well, that's about it. Thank you for sitting through this demo. Hopefully this app is as helpful to you guys as it is to me. If you have any features that you want to add or anything that you feel is missing from the app, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to work on this. It's a side project, but I personally find it a lot of fun. So yeah, hope you have a great rest of your days, guys.